What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we're actually going to be discussing the Season 1 mechanic, or more specifically the inversion reinforcement mechanic, which is built into Season 1, which is basically something that you can play over time and level up, and then this will give you some small to, I would say, slightly medium-sized boosts or benefits depending on which activity you're doing. Now there's two reasons why it's taken me this long to make this video, since we are actually a couple of weeks into Season 1 already, and that's because I just recently maxed out everything, so I was able to test everything and basically see how they all work together to kind of also figure out which three would be the best three to combine together, at least according to me. And then also with the October 10th patch that's coming out, we're going to start seeing level 400 or 400% dungeons to do, and that will be presumably the most difficult sort of like PvE based like group content that you can do in the game, except for of course void intercept bosses. I think maybe some of these benefits that we can get from the inversion reinforcements will actually come into play there. But starting us off, first and foremost, basically you have 5 different streams. You have hunt, you have attribute, you have recovery, you have survival, and you have season. Each one of these you can pick one in, and you can pick 3 in total, which can be on your activation bar. And then also bearing in mind that if you completely unlock one line, then you will automatically get the 5th point, or the 5th, let's say, upgrade in that line for free, constantly active. So there's definitely a reason for you to finish all of these, since when that is done, you actually have all 5 of these buffs available 24/7, no matter on what you actually pick on the bar over here. Now, first and foremost, what I'd like to do is I'd go through each one of the categories and I'll give you some highlights as to which ones are better than others. But first and foremost, I think we should also just cover the cost here. So the total level is level 30. And the cost here is each one of these costs in the first 3 in the line cost 1, and then the 4th one costs 3. So that you can see each line will cost you 6 levels to unlock, and 6 times 5 gives you 30. So once you've gotten to level 30, that is the max level, and that will be everything unlocked for you. So starting us off with the first line, this line is mostly about boosting your survivability through either HP, defense, shield, and so on. So the first one here is basically that it says that it increases your max HP by 9.5% for 30 seconds, up to 5 stacks every time you defeat an enemy. And this is a common flavor with all of these. The second one basically increases your shield, your max shield. The third one increases your max MP, but also lowers your skill range by 1%, and this stacks up to 5 stacks, so you'll lose 5% skill range if you have all 5 of these stacks active. And then the last one here actually increases your defense by 7% for 30 seconds, up to 5 stacks. So basically then also just giving you 35% additional defense if you have all 5 stacks active. So all 4 of these kind of like seem the same, and it depends on which one you want to pick as your flavor. But there's actually one big difference, and that's the reason why inversion particle augmentation, the one for defense, rises above the other 3. Let me explain. The key is actually in the wording. You'll see here that this says that your max HP is increased by 9.5% up to for 30 seconds, up to 5 stacks. And this also says max shield, this also says max MP, and then this one just says defense increase. So if we just make sure to pick that quickly, we'll use the HP one just to experiment with and to show you what I mean. Is so having that one selected, we can just go find some enemies. Now I want you to take special notice of my HP at the bottom there. You'll see it's 4764. That is my max HP on this bunny. And so now we need to find some enemies that we can kill so we can engage this buff. So let me see if I can, there should be some dudes wandering around. There we go. So those 3 fellas there, so I should be able to get 3 stacks. So we're gonna go pop these dudes quickly. There we go. Now you'll see the buff is live for 30 seconds, and you'll see that my HP is still the same level. It's 4764, but now there's a little bit of an edge there. And if I go over here and I pick this up, you'll see that I now have more HP. So basically what this does is it increases your overall max, but doesn't actually fill it up with the resource. So you don't get more HP immediately, you still have to pick it up. The same is true for MP, and as you guessed it, the same is true for shield. That shield actually has to regen in. However, if you actually use the 4th one, which is the defense based one, this says it increases your defense by 7% for 30 seconds, and for 5 stacks that's 35%. And this is not something that needs to be filled up or anything like that. This is just blanket. If you've killed 5 enemies, you have 35% more defense. This is really good because defense actually affects the toughness of your HP bar as well as your shield bar. And you can very easily test this in situations like you can go into the lab or something like that. But I think this is well known by this point in time that defense doesn't just affect how strong your HP is and how much damage resistance your HP bar has, but it also affects your shield. So this is really, really good and actually far above the other ones because it doesn't require you to then, to shoot something, kill it, to get the additional and then go get the HP and then eventually it falls off. This can indefinitely, as long as you are killing enemies, you will constantly have this 35% additional defense. And what that's going to do is it's going to affect the toughness of both of your bars, basically your shield bar as well as your HP bar. And this can be really powerful in situations where you're fighting groups of enemies over and over and you want to stay stationary. You don't want to necessarily move out and go pick up HP or anything like that. You can just basically lock down and shoot, and you're always going to have this defensive benefit. That's why this one for sure is the best one in the hunt line. Then when we look at our next section in here, we have attribute. Attribute is all about resistances, and all 4 of the resistances types are covered here. So the first one basically is related to fire or flame, and the second one is related to chill. The third one is related to toxin, and the last one is related to electric. They all work a little bit different. The first one says that after you reload, it grants you basically this additional resistance to fire. The second one gives you additional resistance to chill after hitting an enemy with a firearm. You don't have to hit it in a weak point, anything like that. You can simply just hit it with some bullets. And then the third one says when aiming, you will get this additional toxin resistance. And then the last one says on weak point hit with a firearm, you will get the electric resistance. Now, that being said, if you are this hard up for resistances, of course your choice here matters based on which void intercept boss you're fighting, or if you're going into a specific dungeon or a let's say a area that you know that's going to have a lot of pools of poison lying around or pools of fire or something like that, then of course that can determine your choice here. But by default, the one that I usually go with is the chill one, and there's 2 reasons for that. First of all, it's by far the easiest one to activate and to maintain because you just have to hit an enemy with a firearm. You don't have to be aiming down sights, you don't have to be reloaded, you don't have to hit a weak point. You can simply hip fire or shoot down sights, and as soon as you hit an enemy, you get this. Now, bearing in mind, you only get this effect for a very short time. You'll see chill resistance 9.8% plus for 0.5 seconds up to 2 stacks. You can get almost 20% resistance, and as long as you keep pumping bullets into the enemy, it will keep those stacks up. And that brings me to my second reason why I use this. And that is because pretty much the only boss that I still religiously fight against is of course Gluttony, and Gluttony is considered an ice boss. His attack attribute is chill. So basically this is a really, really good one to use if you're constantly going up against bosses that have chill. Maybe you're not going up against him, maybe you're going up against Deadbride, maybe you're going up against Frostwalker. The point is, all chill attribute bosses, basically when you shoot them, you will have this additional resistance to their element of choice there. Again, like I said, it's entirely up to you which one you want to use, but by default, this one, as I said, activates super quick. And since Gluttony seems to be the only dude we're still messing around with, this is the one to go. Now, interestingly, the boss that is joining us on October 10th, Deathstalker, is a toxic boss as far as I'm aware. So we need to see whether that makes it that this one is better. So high density toxic particle membrane gives you 2 stacks. As long as you're aiming, so as long as you're aiming down sights, you will have this additional 13% of toxin resistance. And then of course, as soon as you aim off sight, or as soon as you run or swing or something like that, you're of course going to lose the effect. So it's something that we can test with right now. But I will say this, generally speaking, if you need this to save you against these bosses, if this is like the Hail Mary that saves you against bosses, it might mean that you're not supposed to be fighting those bosses yet, and you could probably benefit more from actually putting some resistance on, an external component or on your Descendant modules or something like that. But this is more like a have more situation, and in that case it can actually come in quite handy. Of course, remember that this is a percentage base, so the last thing I want to mention here is the more you have of the resistance, the more you'll get from it, right? So if you have 10 chill resistance, then an additional 20% of that is not exactly a lot. Whereas if you have 6,000 chill resistance, then an additional 20% of that is actually quite a bit. So bear that in mind as well. You actually need to be stacking some resistance at least. So as you can see at the moment right now on this bunny here, none of those would be doing me any good at all, since my resistances are so super low. Third, we have recovery. In recovery, we have 4, I would say, fairly different options available to us here. Basically, if you look at the first one, this is if hit while at 10% HP or less, you do not die. It gives you this defibrillation effect. What this does is it consumes all of your MP to recover HP proportionately to the amount of MP consumed. When the effect is triggered, it guarantees HP recovery of between 20% to 50%. So that's at least what you get. But let's say, for example, if you have a full MP bar, then you can actually get more than that, because it basically translates it 1-to-1 in a way. Now, the thing about this is it is a really good thing to have in terms of like a safety net that you can essentially come back to life if you were supposed to die. But the problem is that if you are playing a skill-based Descendant, then this can be something that doesn't necessarily mean all that much to you, because coming back with 20% of your HP and then basically immediately dying to whatever fire you were standing in on the next shot you take or something like that might not be exactly the value that you're looking for. That being said, if you're playing gun-based Descendants, or that don't necessarily touch their MP bars or so, then this might be something that is fairly decent, because that MP bar, when it's like at 80% or 90% or something like that, can usually translate into a fair amount of HP for you, which is actually pretty decent. The second choice here is actually one which I personally really like, and that's selective neurostimulation. Tough word to say really fast. It grants one of the following 3 effects every 60 seconds, and so it basically cycles between these. Now, when I say cycle, it doesn't go a 1 2 3 1 2 3. It actually randomly picks between them. So basically what happens here is that you can end up with the same ones a couple of times in a row. It's entirely possible, but these 3 different effects work like this. The first one is mental stimulation, and this is it has a 60% chance to recover MP by basically 13.4% of max MP. So if you have a fairly large MP pool, this could be a pretty big amount of MP coming back into your bar. Then we have highly focused, which has a 30% chance to recover MP by 23.5% of max MP. And then last but not least, we have release unconsciousness, has a 10% chance to recover MP by 30% of max MP and HP by 7.8% of max HP. So each of these effects is effectively better than the one above it. And that's why I say that these don't drop in turn. You don't get effect 1, then 2, then 3, but rather you have a percentage chance for it essentially showing up. So the one that you're most likely to see most of the time, at least 60% of the time, is mental stimulation. And of course, the best one is release unconsciousness, which gives you that massive sort of like boost to your MP as well as your HP. But nonetheless, this is a fantastic recovery mechanic, and the fact that this rolls every 60 seconds means that in a 10-minute fight that you're doing, something like that, you're gonna have 10 chances of this essentially proccing, and this can be super powerful if you get it lucky and you get a bunch of these dropping in a row, because you're just never gonna run out of MP. So then we also have recovery maneuver. This says that when using a grappling hook, it gives you this buff. This recovers shield by 2.5% of max shield every 0.1 seconds while using grappling hook up to 25%. And there's 2 reasons why I don't like this. The fact that it has a 20-second cooldown is not great. And then secondly, the fact that most of the time shield ends up being the defensive stat between shield, HP and defense that players stack the least. So in very seldom cases where you are actually building your Descendant to pretty much stack as much shield, and I can think of maybe 3-4 Descendants which I currently have built that rather stack shield instead of HP. This means that this is a little bit limited in its use, but of course we have some mods that recently came out that are all about buffing your shields, and so it's not to say that this won't be great later on in the season if we start stacking those mods into it. I've yet to test some of that stuff, but I think in the end it's probably still just going to be better to just stack HP. And then the last one is arc assimilation. This says that when an ally is nearby, it gives you this debuff every this buff every 0.5 seconds. This lasts for 2 seconds and recovers HP by 14% of max HP upon reaching max stacks, up to 10 stacks, and it has a 10-second cooldown. This is pretty good if you are predominantly a player that does group content, whether that is you doing intercepts, void intercepts, if you're doing the infiltrations, anything like that. If you tend to play a lot of the times in groups, this is kind of like a no-brainer, because it's just a decent amount of HP regen that you can get just by running around with other players. And this in combination with some of the other, mods, which basically give you even more survivability, like for example, inversion particle augmentation, is going to be a lot of survivability. Now, if you play solo a lot, then you are shit out of luck, because then of course this is a dead one for you. Then our fourth tree is survival. Now, survival has pretty much a bunch of different sort of mods, but 3 of them focus on the different factions in the game. And in my opinion, maybe except for like the last line, but this line is possibly the worst one out of them, simply due to the fact that, first of all, don't get me started on factions in this game, which I think is an unnecessary layer of complexity in this game that's not necessarily supposed to give any value to the experience as a whole. But then also the fact that this makes it essentially that unless you are fighting the exact faction that this particular mod pertains to, then you have a dead choice here. So that's why this is so unpopular. But our first one here says that when HP is 20% or less during intercept battles, all your movement speed is increased by 20% for 3 seconds. So you get like a little bit of a speed boost as soon as your HP goes below 20%. I tend to feel like the times that your HP does go below 20%, you are either basically one shot away from dying, or you're pretty much about to die. So giving yourself a little bit of a speed boost there could potentially get you out of like some fire or something like that. But this might just be a situation that this is just not good enough to deserve to be on your slot list. Now, the next one is secondary quantization response. I practiced saying these before recording this video. As you can tell, it did nothing for me. This one says that when you are attacking Legion of Immortality, which is one of the 3 factions, this decreases incoming damage from them. Next one does the same thing for Order of Truth. And then of course the third one does the same thing for Legion of Darkness. So if you do find yourself doing a lot of this content, and again, we will see these level 400 dungeons coming on October 10th. So in those cases, you can see which faction is inside the dungeon, and then you can pick this up. This is basically going to give you a flat 15% damage reduction against those. Well, they're going to deal 15% less damage to you. I just want to be sure that I say that right. So they're going to basically deal 15% less damage to you, and this might actually make some of those dungeons a little bit easier, especially considering that some of the factions are more irritating than others. I'm thinking of those poison bastards. But yeah, nonetheless, I think offense is a better defense. So focusing on making yourself 15% tougher against the enemies rather than, getting yourself an effect here, which gives you more overall survivability or more offensive power in the way of like regenerating your MP or something faster, is probably a better choice. Last one is all about season, and this one pretty much has effects in it which are all around the season mechanic. Now, of course, the season mechanic in season 1 is invasions, where you do these shortened versions of the dungeons where they have different mechanics in, like some of them you have to match the symbols and then get the gun and shoot the door. Other ones you have to return the items to an altar. But pretty much the first one here is identify energy source. This says that when it causes an additional hit when hitting the legions attached to arc container with a firearm. Now, this mechanic itself is already like made easier now since they patched. So this is not necessarily something that I think is all that, powerful. The bottom line is the gun that you get out of the mechanic gives you 6 shots. That's 2 per legion. So if you make sure that you don't miss any shots, then 1 gun is enough to get you through 1 door. This basically means that you will then in fact have 1 gun shooting all 3 eyes and have 3 shots available. So if you are a terrible shot, and I do know that it's a little bit more difficult using those guns on console than it is on keyboard and mouse, so maybe if you're a console player, this is something that you might want to look at. But again, it's very niche, because the point is, unless you're playing those particular missions, and of course you can select this beforehand just for that, it's obviously of no use. Next one is forced device connection. This says that stepping onto an arc tile during the Legion of Darkness invasion grants forced device connection every 0.5 seconds. Now, the arc tile these are for those missions that you have to step on the tile and then it shows you the combination of symbols that you have to hit to be able to open up the door. This pretty much then gives you some additional defense while you are standing on those tiles. Now, again, these missions used to be a lot more difficult. These enemies used to deal a lot more damage. I do know that some people still struggle a little bit with survivability. And in those moments that you are trying to get these tiles activated, you have to stand still, or at the very least on a very small area, so you can't really dodge and be fucking awesome and avoid fire. So this can give you a little bit of additional damage reduction there in the form of defense. So try this out if you are struggling with survivability and you've tried literally everything else, including external components, mods, and everything like that. This might be what gives you the edge. But I also feel like if you actually just take a little bit more defensive, mods instead of offensive mods, then you should be fine, and they can accomplish this by just, doing some stuff with your Descendant themselves. The third one is all about the Excava. The Excava is, of course, the first new ultimate weapon that we got at the beginning of Season 1. And I can basically show you how this buff works. So as mentioned here, we have the Excava. Pretty much how this works is when you're shooting the weapon and you're not aiming down sights, you are building up something called voltage charge. Pretty much when this hits a certain amount of stacks, then it shoots an energy grenade. That's basically how this gun works. And you shoot the energy grenade by aiming down sights, and then the grenade will fire out. So if we go back to what this particular upgrade here tells us, it says that when the Excava's energy grenade is at max stacks, it grants you electric displacement field. What electric displacement field does is it gives you firearm attack plus 51% for 2 seconds. Now, changing weapons removes this, and obviously after the 2 seconds it goes onto cooldown, and this cooldown is 20 seconds. So plus 51% is not a lot, but pretty much what this means is that you have to be hip firing, because as soon as you essentially aim down sights, you are going to shoot the energy grenade, and then you're not going to be charged up. In other words, this effect will not prime. So we can simply test this by basically shooting. You can see my energy grenade stacks are stacking up on the side there, and now we're at max stacks, and now we should be getting that buff. Now, as you can see, as I'm at max stacks there, I can then shoot out and shoot the grenade, just to show you again how the effect stacks up. And essentially there we go, and now we're just building up the stacks. Now you can see that this effect is present for the specific icon that you're looking at there, and of course that icon matches what you're seeing here, and here you can see the effect of the cooldown actually happening as well. So first of all, I don't think the Excava is a fantastic weapon. As far as assault rifles go, there are better options than for you to use the Excava. Of course, I don't have mine fully maxed out, so of course if it's fully maxed out with all of the relevant accoutrement in here, and basically everything upgraded so that you're sitting at about 550 maybe 600 DPS, then this might be a little bit more substantial. But in my opinion, something like the Enduring Legacy is just going to outperform this all the time. I even think Thunder Cage is probably better than that. So I think it's fairly situational. That buff does not last very long at all. 2 seconds is basically nothing, and 51% additional DPS is not all that much, considering that you have a relatively small mag size, and the weapon, except for that buff, is not that great. And it's far better for you to field something like, especially if you're doing Void Intercept bosses, something like the Enduring Legacy in, which is just going to be more bang for your buck and overall more DPS over a specific time if you measure it. And then last but certainly not least, we have Arc Pacemaker. This says that when movement speed is 300 or less, it grants you this effect. What this effect does is it decreases skill cost by 25%, but also decreases your skill range by 5% and your fire rate by 5%. The idea behind this effect is that if you are moving really slow, and that means either you're channeling an ability or you're aiming down sight or something like that, then you will actually benefit from this 25% skill cost reduction, which is a lot, let's be honest, and it's kind of cool. But something that I found with this, and I'm actually going to demonstrate this to you, but something that I found with this is it's relatively difficult to trigger this in certain situations, and overall is just not that gratifying an effect to use, because again, the point is that you have to be very, very slow. You have to be either channeling or aiming down sight for this to proc, and if you're fighting against an enemy, most likely that means that at that point in time you're going to take a lot more damage. and it might not be worth it considering that you're just getting this small sort of skill cost reduction. But let me show you what I mean. So first things first, you can get your movement speed by simply opening up your character sheet. And I'll just move my face to the side here. You'll see here that my movement speed by default, this is with Blair by the way, is 376. Then moving while firing is 232, and then while aiming down sights it's 160. So we can see that the only two times that we'll have a chance of proccing this is by when we are basically shooting, and also when we are aiming down sights. But I also find that furthermore, this is not a reliable way to proc it, and I'll show you quite easily. So we're again here in the lab, and let me actually just replenish a little bit here, and then pretty much, let me see, we'll go like this, and then we'll activate this ability, and you can see Arc Pacemaker is now available there next to my, you can see the little icon there. Now you can see I'm aiming down sights here, and I'm shooting, and you can see Arc Pacemaker is not actually proccing, even though I am slow enough for it to actually proc. Now this can be due to the fact that my mana pool is full. Maybe that is the interaction that's causing this or something. But even if I dump a whole bunch of skills and do this and shoot like a big old, there it comes, and there you can see it procced for a short little while there while I was channeling the fourth ability, but does not actually proc when I'm aiming down sights. So I think the usability here is very, very limited. Now, of course, I try to mess with this a bunch of different ways. So you can actually lower your movement speed with certain mods on weapons, for example, like you can use something like General Rounds Compulsive. This actually gives you 20% less movement speed if you have the weapon out. So let's swap to this bad boy quickly. That actually made functionally no difference. I am now 20% slower, so I'm even further lower than the threshold for this mod to activate, or this buff to activate. It does not, however, as soon as I start channeling my third ability, boop, it shows up. So it seems like the wording on it might be slightly misleading. Basically, the way that I would understand it is that as soon as you fall underneath this threshold of 300, it should just be blanket on all the time. But that's simply not the case, because you can see here, aiming down sights, I'm definitely slower than 300 here, and it's just not activating. Okay, and then for the last section of the video, I'm actually just going to split this into two parts. The first one, I'm just going to suggest you the order in which you should level these up first. So in other words, my suggestion is finish line by line, so that you can actually get this final buff here, because having this active the entire time is kind of dope. So I'll tell you which order you should be unlocking these in. In fact, let me just do that right now. So I definitely think you should be targeting either Hunt or Attribute first. It should be your choice yourself. But personally, for me, both of these are super strong. The top one, Hunt, basically reduces incoming damage by 4.1%. So that's a flat damage reduction that you constantly have available on your character as soon as you have one of these augmentation effects on. So that's something that you have to bear in mind. This only activates when you have this active. So you're not going to have this damage reduction just by walking around, but as soon as you start shooting enemies and you get inversion particle augmentation, then boop, this activates as well, and you're good to go. So Hunt is really good for first choice. Your second choice would then be Attribute, otherwise Attribute first and then Hunt. This says that when a particle membrane effect is active, you also get this plus 10.7% attribute resistance. All attribute resistance, so this is pretty much all of them. So if you have any one of these four selected, like for example, I have Chill Particle Membrane, as soon as I hit an enemy with a firearm, this kicks in, and as soon as this kicks in, this also kicks in. So these would be your 1 and 2, or your 1 and 2, like that. Then in third choice, pretty much I think all three of these are not necessarily all that great. However, if you find yourself struggling and having your Void Intercept bosses last very long, then certainly you can consider something like Void Defense Optimization. This says that during intercept battles, this grants you Void Defense Optimization every 150 seconds. So every 2 minutes and 30 seconds, you will basically be getting this increased 2.7 damage modifier decrease. And this stacks up to 3 times. So you can get almost 9% of damage reduction after 7.5 minutes have passed. Then you can essentially get this modifier. And of course, these Void Intercept bosses battles, except for the ones that have an instant kill mechanic, last for up to 10 minutes. And so therefore, this can actually give you a little bit of additional survivability. But like I said, I told you it's not that great. Then also hyperdimensional vision. This says that when landing a firearm critical hit, this has a 27% chance of giving you this debuff. This removes debuffs from you for 3 seconds and grants you debuff immunity for the duration. So basically, if you have, let's say for example, you've got a bunch of poison or fire or something like that that's ticking on you, then when you land a firearm critical hit, there's a 1 in 4 chance that this effect procs, then strips the fire and the poison off you and makes you immune to it for 3 seconds. So this is not just fire and poison, I just use those, but this can be any debuff. And so this has some situational wealth though, but of course the point is that you need to be landing a firearm crit. So it's something that you have to bear in mind. It's not just going to automatically turn on when you get debuffed. So when you see a bad debuff on you, you know that's about to happen, then you can hit the crit and it's going to actually strip it off you. But again, this requires you to be vigilant and use it, which is one of the reasons why I don't rank it higher. And then the last one is unconsciousness. This says that when all your skills are on cooldown, you get this buff. This decreases the cooldown of the next skill used by 8%. This is fucking terrible. And I would make sure to be this the last one that you get, because first of all, 8% is literally nothing. And then also the other thing is, it's very, 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 very seldom that you have a situation where all 4 of your skills are on cooldown. You really have to be working your ass off to get all 4 skills on cooldown at the same time. And if you're doing that, it means that it's possible that you're doing that on purpose. And then the point is you're probably not using those cooldowns efficiently. And then you're only getting this 8% of cooldown reduction on the next one. So to give you an example, like if this was a case of you having a 60-second cooldown on a big spell and you get this to proc, this is only actually going to reduce it by about 4 seconds on that cooldown. So it's not that great. Of course, this does stack with other cooldown reduction and stuff like that, but the point is that cooldown reduction is going to be doing the majority of the work in any case, where this is kind of like an on point. It's a good thing that this is a free thing on there for you, because the point is it wouldn't have been worth it to pick it in the first place. Then last, I promise before I let you go, my default 3 that I run, as I've mentioned, is Chill Particle Membrane, because I go up against chill bosses like Gluttony a lot. That's really the only time when resistances matter to me. I like Selective Neurostimulation because this gives me this random roll at basically, you know, some MP regen as well as some HP if I get really lucky. And then of course Inversion Particle Augmentation, which is the defense one, so the 4th one at the top here. I would consider some alternatives here. Obviously, if you are going up against different elementals, you can match those in the attribute tree. I also think that if you have a specific descendant that you're playing that's stacking a lot of shield, I think Recovery Maneuver can be good for you as well. And then last but not least, if you find yourself running in groups a lot, then it's possible that Arc Assimilation is going to mean more for you than something like, for example, the additional chill resistance or something like that. Especially if you're not actually going up against intercept bosses, but you're just grinding away at content, you're doing dungeons, you're doing like, you know, all of the other content except for Void Intercepts, then this can actually mean a lot for you if you're running in groups while you're doing that. And that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know what your 3 skills that you focus on using, you know, which ones do you actually prefer, which ones do you like using. We have quite a lot of the season left. Pretty much at the time of recording this video, it's like 65 days. So we're getting those you know, new dungeons, the level 400 intercept dungeons or infiltrate dungeons on the 10th of October, and of course we're getting the new boss and stuff. So there's no word if they're going to further on change these. They've already buffed these ones because they used to have really terrible negative effects as well. They actually took those away because people complained and said there's literally no reason for you to ever pick this shit. It was fucking terrible. So at least now it mostly only has positive effects, so that's a net gain. But I kind of like feel in my bum that there's a chance that they might even boost these up a little bit more. Of course, this mechanic that we saw now is going to be a recurring thing. So next season, season 2, there's going to be a bunch of new nodes and a bunch of new stuff for us to unlock and everything like that. So this is going to be something that's always going to be in the game, at least going forward, and something that we can also usually maybe get some use out of, some survivability, you know, something like that. Other than that, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.